Ladies and gentlemen, in the depths of every human soul lies a shadow, a hidden truth that governs much of our behavior from the unconscious. And it is here, in this twilight of the psyche, where two ancient archetypes often meet, the narcissist and the empath. What unfolds between them is not merely a relationship, but an alchemical confrontation, a sacred dance of objection and reflection. One seeks to dominate through illusion and control, the other absorbs, feels and mirrors until, one day, a revelation occurs. The empath learns the language of the narcissist. The language of the narcissist is not simply made up of the words they speak, but of the energy they emit, the rhythms of their responses and the strategic timing of their silence. It is a language constructed not for connection but for control. Unlike the language of the soul, which seeks truth, authenticity and communion, the narcissist's language is engineered to seduce, confuse, and ultimately dominate. Every word they speak is laced with calculation. Compliments are not offered as genuine recognition but as currency bartered for obedience or admiration. Apologies, if ever given, are not confessions of remorse but maneuvers to reset the stage in their favor. Even silence becomes a tool, a weapon cloaked in the absence of sound, used to punish or destabilize. Their language is more akin to spellcraft than conversation, designed to enchant, obscure and entrap. It is important to understand that the narcissist does not speak from the heart, they speak from the wound, although they do not realize it. Beneath the surface level charm or grandiosity lies a deep primal fear of inadequacy. This fear, buried and denied, drives the creation of the false self, a carefully curated persona meant to hide the inner void. Because they cannot face their own darkness, they project it onto others. In this way, the narcissist's language becomes a mirror house of distortion, where the listener begins to question their own reality. What was once clear becomes murky. The empath, in their unguarded state, may begin to feel as though they are losing their mind, not realizing that they are being slowly reprogrammed to doubt themselves and accept the narcissist's version of reality. This is not accidental, it is a process as ancient as myth itself, the predator disguising itself as the protector, the destroyer masquerading as the savior, and the narcissist, in mastering this language, has refined it through years of practice. They have learned when to flatter and when to withhold affection. They have learned how to fabricate vulnerability just enough to disarm suspicion but never enough to reveal the truth. Their stories are rehearsed, their pain selectively displayed, their emotional accessibility a calculated performance. It is not that they feel nothing, it is that their feelings are in service to the performance of the false self. They are actors in a one-person play, and everyone else is conscripted into supporting roles, expected to reflect their brilliance, affirm their superiority, and never challenge the narrative. The moment one steps out of character, by asserting a boundary, expressing independent thought or revealing inconsistency, the narcissist's tone shifts. The warmth vanishes. The language becomes cold, biting, dismissive, or worse, pathologically sweet. Not because the narcissist feels hurt in a normal sense, but because their illusion is being threatened. One must realize that this language, while subtle, is profoundly manipulative. It thrives in environments where words are believed over instincts, where appearances outweigh authenticity, and where the listener is already predisposed to self-doubt. The empath, often deeply attuned to others' emotions and driven by a desire to heal, becomes the perfect recipient of this language. Their natural inclination to give the benefit of the doubt, to look for the wounded inner child, makes them vulnerable to the narcissist's expertly crafted expressions of half-truths and emotional baiting. The narcissist senses this intuitively, though not always consciously, and tailors their language to exploit this sensitivity. They know how to twist guilt into compliance, how to disguise domination as concern, how to make silence feel like abandonment and attention feel like salvation. The empath, overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection, may feel honored, chosen, even spiritually awakened by the relationship, not realizing that what they are experiencing is not divine union but psychological seduction. This language does not exist in words alone, it operates in tones, glances, subtle dismissal, strategic praise, and precisely timed emotional withdrawals. It creates a rhythm, a pulse, a psychological conditioning process that shapes the empath's behavior without the use of force. It is not overt coercion but energetic entrapment. The empath finds themselves anticipating moods, avoiding topics, doubting their memory, questioning their reactions, blaming themselves for every rupture, and feeling inexplicably ashamed without understanding why. This is not love, this is not connection, it is a linguistic prison dressed as intimacy, and until it is named, it remains unbreakable. The empath by nature does not enter relationships seeking power, control, or superiority. They enter with openness, often unaware of the silent contracts written by those who do. Guided by intuition, emotion, and an innate desire to understand others, The empath initially sees what is beautiful, what is possible, and what is wounded beneath the surface. Their perception is colored by compassion, not suspicion. They see through the lens of potential, not pathology. This very trait, while sacred, becomes the opening through which the narcissist's influence begins to flow. The empath interprets intensity as connection, confusion as depth, and volatility as passion. The narcissist, skilled in mimicry and subtle emotional manipulation, cloaks dysfunction in the language of destiny, appearing as a soulmate, a mirror, a once-in-a-lifetime presence. The empath does not see this as danger because their internal world has not been built around the assumption of threat. They assume sincerity. They believe others mean what they say, and feel what they express early in the relationship. The empath may experience a kind of emotional high, drawn into the magnetic field of the narcissist's charm, their approval, their stories of grand hardship and triumph. The empath's heart responds with care, a desire to support, to soothe, to pour light into the cracks they believe they see. They mistake the narcissist's selective vulnerability for courage, their intensity for authenticity, and their need for control as an expression of woundedness in need of healing. The empath, operating from the paradigm of emotional availability, assumes that if someone is in pain, love will heal them. They do not yet understand that the narcissist does not want healing, they want supply. Emotional depth, for the narcissist, is not a pathway to transformation but a terrain to be navigated and exploited. The empath, unaware of this, gives more, listens more, accommodates more, not realizing that with each act of giving, they are reinforcing the narcissist's unspoken entitlement. The erosion begins subtly. A joke that stings, a compliment that feels conditional, a strange silence after expressing a need. These moments are dismissed, rationalized, explained away by the empath's generous mind. They believe in repairing, in finding the misunderstanding, in choosing love over pride. But the pattern continues. Praise is interspersed with criticism, support with withdrawal, presence with neglect. The narcissist becomes the sun around which the empath begins to orbit, not out of conscious choice but out of emotional dependency created through inconsistency. The empath begins to feel that their emotional state is dictated by the narcissist's mood. When the narcissist is pleased, the world feels right. When they are distant or disapproving, the empath feels they have failed, and so they try harder. They give more, apologize more, suppress more. Their boundaries blur. Not because they are weak, but because they are trying to preserve what they believe is love. What they are preserving is a dynamic, not a connection. It is a system of emotional exchange where one gives endlessly and the other takes without end. The empath begins to lose sight of themselves. Their needs feel like burdens. Their emotions feel inconvenient. Their intuition, once sharp and clear, becomes fogged by second-guessing and self-blame. They feel the dissonance but cannot name it. They sense something is wrong but have been conditioned to believe that the problem lies within them. The narcissist, masterful in shaping narratives, reinforces this belief. They suggest the empath is too sensitive, too needy, too emotional. They frame themselves as misunderstood, burdened, or even victimized by the empath's reactions. And the empath, ever introspective, takes this in, internalizes it, and tries to do better. This is not love, yet it wears love's mask. It is not partnership, yet it imitates intimacy. The empath does not see the manipulation because they are listening with their heart, not with discernment. They are translating the narcissist's behavior through their own emotional language, assuming intention where there is strategy, assigning care where there is control. The narcissist knows this even if only instinctively and plays upon it. Offering just enough warmth to keep the empath engaged, just enough vulnerability to maintain the illusion, just enough affection to blur the cruelty. The empath remains, not out of weakness, but out of hope, believing that love will eventually melt the ice, that enough compassion will awaken the dormant heart, that sacrifice will be recognized and reciprocated. And so the cycle continues, the empath giving, the narcissist taking, the truth buried beneath 1,000 small betrayals dressed in the language of affection. There comes a moment in the empath's journey, that does not arrive with thunder or fanfare, but rather with a quiet, persistent whisper that something is deeply wrong beneath the surface. It often begins not in confrontation but in fatigue. A deep soul awareness that cannot be explained by circumstance alone. The empath, once so full of light and giving, finds themselves drained in ways they cannot articulate. They notice the way their thoughts circle endlessly, replaying conversations, questioning themselves, apologizing internally for things they didn't do. This internal erosion does not feel like awakening at first, it feels like failure. They wonder why they feel so lost, so anxious, so unsure in the presence of someone they once trusted with their heart. They may believe they have become the problem. That their growing discomfort is a sign of inadequacy rather than evidence of manipulation. But the psyche, wise and unwilling to be silenced forever, begins to break through the fog in subtle, undeniable ways. The awakening of the empath is not a single epiphany, but a series of small, cumulative recognitions. It happens when they catch the same sentence repeated with different meanings. When they realize an apology was never followed by change. When the timelines of the narcissist stories don't add up. When they notice how often they feel guilty after expressing a boundary or how they brace themselves before sharing an emotion. These patterns, once dismissed or ignored, begin to form a shape too coherent to deny. The empath starts to see the cracks in the narrative. They recognize that the relationship operates on unspoken rules that always benefit one side. They begin to feel that their empathy has been turned against them, that their capacity for understanding has become a weapon in someone else's hands. This is the moment when clarity begins to rise. Not as rage or revenge, but as quiet realization. The empath, in their awakening, does not initially feel powerful, they feel heartbroken. To realize that someone they have loved, supported, and defended has been playing a role is not merely painful, it is existential. It shakes their foundation. They question their own judgment, their history, their sense of reality. But even amidst this collapse, something within them strengthens. They begin to listen more closely, not to the narcissist but to themselves. The voice that was silenced, the intuition that was muted, the discomfort that was once rationalized away. These signals begin to return with force and clarity. The empath begins to reclaim their inner authority, recognizing that the confusion they felt was not weakness but a response to emotional distortion. They see that their instincts were never wrong, only overwritten. As the veil lifts, the narcissist's language becomes transparent. The tactics that once confused now appear formulaic. Love bombing feels hollow. Guilt tripping becomes recognizable. Gaslighting fails to destabilize. The empath starts to see the narcissist not as a mysterious figure of complexity, but as someone deeply predictable in their avoidance of accountability. The mask falls, not because the narcissist takes it off, but because the empath no longer projects meaning onto it. They no longer interpret manipulation as misunderstanding or cruelty as pain. They stop trying to decode contradictions and begin to accept them for what they are. Evidence of someone unwilling or unable to meet them in truth. This shift is internal, quiet and irreversible. The empath no longer seeks to fix the dynamic. They no longer accept breadcrumbs as love or silence as peace. They stop participating in the unspoken performance where must shrink so the narcissist can feel large. They begin to see that what they thought was connection was conditional control. That what they thought was intimacy was actually a form of psychological survival. And in this new seeing they begin to pull their energy inward. They begin to say no, not from anger, but from alignment. They begin to reclaim space, not to punish, but to protect. They begin to feel the edges of own soul again, untouched by distortion, clear, grounded, and sovereign. The awakening does not require the narcissist's recognition or apology. It exists independent of their awareness because it is not about them anymore. It never truly was. It is the empath remembering themselves, unlearning the false language they were forced to speak, and beginning, at last, to hear their own voice. When the narcissist realizes that the empath has learned their language, a profound disturbance ripples through their carefully constructed world. The narcissist, accustomed to holding the reins of control through confusion and emotional manipulation, suddenly finds the dynamics shifting beneath their feet. The empath, once malleable and vulnerable to their influence, now responds not with compliance but with recognition. This recognition acts like a mirror that refuses to distort, reflecting back truths the narcissist had long buried beneath layers of charm and deceit. This reflection is terrifying, not because it reveals some external judgment, but because it exposes the narcissist's own fragility, the emptiness behind the mask, the insecurity beneath the arrogance. The wound that they have tried so desperately to hide. The narcissist's power lies in the maintenance of illusion, in the ability to shape reality through selective narratives and emotional puppetry. When the empath speaks the language of the narcissist back to them, no longer as a victim but as a conscious participant, this illusion begins to unravel. The narcissist experiences this as a threat to their very existence, because their identity is so thoroughly entwined with the performance. Without the ability to control the narrative, their sense of self begins to crumble. The predictable scripts they have relied on, the gaslighting, the blame shifting, the emotional withholding, lose their effectiveness. The narcissist becomes unmoored, confronted by the knowledge that their audience no longer sees the performance as real. This loss of control is experienced not as disappointment, but as existential danger. In response to this threat, the narcissist often reacts with increased intensity. Their language shifts from seductive and confusing to aggressive or defensive. They may escalate blame, use anger as a weapon, or retreat into silence to regain power through absence. These reactions are not calculated in the moment, they emerge from a deep unconscious panic. The narcissist's psyche, fragile and fragmented, cannot tolerate the empath's newfound clarity, because it forces a confrontation with the parts of themselves they have long denied. Rather than meeting the empath in truth, they retreat further into the false self, doubling down on deception and control to stave off the fear of being truly seen and found wanting. This defensive posture, however, is a double-edged sword. While it may momentarily reassert the narcissist's dominance, it also alienates the empath further. The empath, no longer willing to participate in the game of shadows, begins to detach emotionally and mentally. They no longer internalize the narcissist's distortions as reality. Instead, they hold space for themselves outside the drama, creating boundaries that the narcissist's language can no longer penetrate. This detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is a reclaiming of selfhood in the face of fragmentation. The empath becomes, paradoxically, the one who is whole in a relationship where the narcissist is fragmented. The narcissist, confronted by this boundary, often experiences it as rejection, abandonment, or betrayal. Their language may shift again, this time to plead, to promise change, to mimic vulnerability in an attempt to regain influence. Yet, having learned the language, the empath now sees these moves for what they are: patterns of manipulation, rather than genuine transformation. The empath's newly acquired understanding allows them to hold compassion without surrendering power. They recognize the narcissist's pain without condoning their tactics. This balance of empathy and discernment shifts the relationship dynamic profoundly. Ultimately, the narcissist's recognition of the empath's awakening is a moment of crisis. It forces a reckoning with their own shadow, an invitation to confront the false self they have long protected. Whether they choose to embrace this opportunity for growth or retreat further into defense, the balance of power has shifted irrevocably. The empath, no longer the silent recipient of manipulation, now stands as an equal in the emotional exchange, speaking the language once used against them, not to harm, but to heal boundaries and reclaim autonomy. This shift signals the potential for transformation, not just for the empath, but for the narcissist as well. If they dare to step beyond fear and face the truth within themselves, the empath, having awakened to the dynamics of manipulation and control, begins a profound transformation, one that moves beyond the old patterns of self-sacrifice and martyrdom toward a new state of empowered compassion. This transformation is not born of bitterness or revenge, but of deep self-recognition and the reclaiming of personal sovereignty. The empath no longer gives from depletion, but from fullness, no longer loses themselves in the emotional wilderness of others, but maintains a clear boundary around their own soul. They understand that empathy is a sacred gift, not a weakness to be exploited. It is a bridge between hearts, yes, but it requires both banks to be solid, grounded, and whole. The empath learns that true empathy demands self-empathy first, a tender and uncompromising care for their own needs, limits, and emotional health. This empowerment is not about dominating or controlling the narcissist in return. The empath ceases to engage in the unending dance of manipulation and reaction. They stop trying to fix the narcissist, to decode every mixed message, or to interpret every silence as love. Instead, they step into the role of observer and guardian of their own spirit. Boundaries, once porous and ignored, become clear and respected. Saying no is no longer an act of defiance, but an expression of self-respect. The empath learns to listen deeply to their own intuition, and to trust it as a compass rather than a confusing riddle. They understand that walking away from toxicity is not abandonment, but an act of survival and self-love. In this process, the empath reclaims their power, not by overpowering the other, but by owning their own space and refusing to be. Empath's new way of being shifts the relationship dynamic radically. Without the fuel of unconscious sacrifice, the narcissist's control loses its hold. The empath's refusal to play the victim role denies the narcissist their usual supply. This shift may initially provoke resistance from the narcissist, but the empath remains steady and centered, no longer reactive but intentional. This stability emanates a quiet strength that the narcissist cannot manipulate because it is rooted in authenticity rather than performance. The empath begins to attract relationships that honor their whole being, relationships that are reciprocal, respectful, and nourishing. They develop a deeper understanding that healthy connection requires mutual recognition, not sacrifice. This transformation also includes a profound healing of the empath's own wounds. The empath begins to integrate their experiences, recognizing how their capacity to love deeply made them vulnerable, but also uniquely powerful. They stop seeing their sensitivity as a flaw and begin to honor it as a vital part of their humanity. This process often involves learning forgiveness, not to excuse past harm, but to release the hold of pain and resentment on their own heart. Forgiveness becomes an act of liberation, freeing the empath from being bound to the narcissist's shadow. They learn that they can hold compassion for the brokens while fiercely protecting their own light. In this new balance, the empath becomes a beacon. Not a victim, not a rescuer, but a whole and radiant being. In reclaiming themselves, the empath also contributes to a larger collective healing. By breaking the cycle of unconscious giving and unconscious kicking, they model a new way of relating. One based on awareness, respect, and authentic connection. Their journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and the power of self-awareness. The empath's emergence from the shadow of manipulation into the light of conscious empathy offers hope to all who have suffered similar dynamics. It is a reminder that even the deepest wounds can become sources of wisdom and strength when met with courage and truth. Ultimately, the empath's transformation is a sacred act of individuation. A movement toward wholeness that transcends victimhood and heroism. It honors the complexity of human relationships and acknowledges the necessity of boundaries as well as bridges. The empath no longer fears their own power or their own depth. They embrace both as gifts to be cultivated and shared with discernment. In this space, the empath is free to love without losing themselves, to connect without sacrificing their essence, and to live a life that is authentically their own. In the end, this is not a story of winners and losers. It is a mythological journey through shadow and light. It is a tale of awakening, of seeing the hidden architecture beneath our relationships, of reclaiming our projections, and returning to our center. When the empath learns the language of the narcissist, it is not about mastering deception, it is about transcending it. It is not about playing their game better. It is about walking away from the game entirely. And in that sacred act of departure, the empath does not become less empathetic, they become whole. Thank you.